Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Sit Down with Sunder. I am your host, Jennifer Canizero, and we are going to unpack the wonderful, wild world of agents today. So, Sunder, thank you for joining us. Now, interestingly enough, I was at an event last week where we asked the audience, it was a room of 100, how many of you are building and using AI agents? Two hands went up. And when that same room was polled around who was expected to be building and adopting agents, nearly every hand went up. Let's just start with the basics here because I think there's still a lot of hype and desire and even misunderstanding about what agents are, what they can and can't do. And we'll dig into all of that today. But Sunder, why don't we just start with the fundamentals? What exactly is an AI agent and what officially makes an agent?
It's interesting you said officially. Um, so I don't think there is one yet. It's one of those things where you open with a great question when you don't know the answer. So this is a great question because I think that there's so many definitions of agent. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of agent washing that's happening. So I'll stick to my definition, which I think is as close to an academic decision as I can possibly put it. For a system to be an agent, it has to have some decision making capability. It has to understand its task. It has to make decisions. It has to decide what path it needs to take based on the situation. It also needs to have access to some tools, ways to interact with the external world, not just produce an output. Those are the core definitions of agent.
Well, it sounds pretty powerful. So I'll follow that up with, hey, can you just give a couple of examples? Maybe one that's outside of B2B tech because we talk a lot about that and one that would be inside that realm.
Yeah, the one I typically go to is the old Roomba, the vacuum cleaner. We didn't call it agent back then, but if you think about what a Roomba agent does, or a vacuum cleaner, it knows its job is to clean the floor. It's need to vacuum it, but it makes decisions along the way. If it comes upon say, an obstruction, a toy or a furniture that was moved, it knows to recognize it and go around it. It still knows it needs to cover the entire floor. It makes decision, designs its path and plan. And most of the time, it knows when it comes up on a stairs and it needs to stop and turn around and not harm itself. But sometimes it goes over. That's what makes it an agent today's definition. Maybe one of the examples, maybe customer service. If an agent is receiving requests from customers, it could be support requests, feature requests, maybe billing question. If an agent can understand its task, understand what the user is asking, triage it, and then decide what to do with it. Maybe it can resolve the issue by itself, or maybe it knows who to send it to, or when it can retrieve the information and identify it, when it doesn't know when to ask for help. That would make an agent that's making decisions, that knows how to resolve, knows when to ask questions, and when to raise a flag.
I love these examples because, well, one with Roomba, like I own one, I'm sure many people do, but you never think about it as an agent. And I think what you're sharing is yes, there's the broader context and understanding that an agent would have, whether that's, the layout of your house or, the way that customer inquiries come in through the support desk and can make those decisions. But there is also this important feedback loop that needs to happen. When do I surface this to whom? And that feedback loop and where a human comes in many ways, I think can make agents more accessible or more powerful or like less scary. I think agents are still kind of scary to some people. What do you think?
I think they are scary. Also, if they are completely autonomous. I know there was a lot of hype around this agents being completely autonomous and you can set them free and they will go tackle any business problem. I think that's where the scary part comes in. Yeah, the example, like if a gut check would be, would we hire someone new or say, well, maybe an intern, and then tell them, here's what you're supposed to do. Here's your instructions. Now go do this. I think we will do that, but not with a high stakes task, right? If the stakes are too high, the decision making is critical. If the impact is critical, we won't do that to even a new hire, a person. So doing that with an agent would be just as risky and scary. And if the task cannot be reversed, imagine if an agent can make a decision and say, I'm going to send a patient healthcare information to somebody, an outside party. There's too much of a risk involved. Or if you don't have someone checking in to say, yep, that information is safe, the recipient can receive it, and it's being sent in a secure manner, if somebody's not checking it, that'd be scary.
Yeah.
The consequences of exposing it and the compliance risks are way too high in that scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so that begs the question. So on the one hand, like, could be very scary, could also be very powerful. And so for organizations who are still getting started, which candidly still may be a lot of organizations because we're, maybe a year and change into this agent speak, if you will. And even in that time, the tech has evolved. I'll ask you a loaded question, which is for any organization out there, like what is the best way for them to get started with agents, bearing in mind a lot of what you've said about risk and human in the loop and so forth?
Yeah, I think it's going to be different from organization to organization, but as a general framework, starting with something simple, right? You may not even need an agent to start with. Just getting comfortable with the AI assisted workflow is probably a good place to start. It doesn't have to immediately go into an autonomous decision making agent. Then, once we cross that bridge, then we can start a task that is highly repeatable, high volume task that you can clearly define, clearly audit, and potentially you can reverse, have human oversight. Those are a good place to start for most organizations. Get your feet wet, get comfortable, get your team comfortable, most importantly. Understanding how that's going to affect your process. Once we have that framework, it's more for getting the organization ready and getting comfortable. It's not so much about the tech, whether it's ready, whether agents are useful. Once we do that, I think progressing through that path will make it a lot easier. Know what to look for, know where the risks are, and prepare for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So repeatable, auditable, and where you can insert a human or multiple humans in the loop. That makes a ton of sense. And we've talked about this before, whether or not it was on this podcast is another thing of really just the importance of still like AI for what to solve what problem. I do love the example you gave about, customer support departments and there's a lot of repeatable requests that come in there, right? "Oh, I forgot my password. Where can I find this thing?" And so that's great, but this is also about change management. Like, do you do all the things all at once, or do you just start with the top 10 questions that every support agent hates to ask that you have very clear answers to? I would say it's probably that.
You bring up a good point, right? And the change management is certainly a big part of this, changing people and processes, but also when we have humans involved, oftentimes everything doesn't have to be clearly defined. Right? If a new employee has a question, they're going to ask someone, and they may not write it down every time. They will ask someone, someone's going to tell them, someone's going to help them along. With the agents, it needs to have that context clearly defined. If say you just point to your enterprise data and you have four different versions of standard operating procedure, a human will get confused, so will an agent. So there's a certain level of change management that needs to be thought through initially, making sure that the agent or agent based systems have clean knowledge base to work with, clean instructions to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. That's that would be the risk of rolling it out too soon when your house isn't in order and then you see customers getting confused because you didn't actually figure that out first. I can imagine that's quite risky. Moving on from there, I think there's we are in an age of expectation, and with expectation comes outcomes. Like experimentation feels like a dirty word these days sometimes with AI, where it's like you got to do it and what are the results? What are your thoughts on how organizations can really think about measuring and reporting on outcomes for agents, and how different might that be or not from how they would look at those broader outcomes for AI generally?
I don't think it's any different than any other system. Like it, when you procure any software, for instance, you generally have an idea of what problems you're trying to solve. What is the outcome? How do you measure value? How do you measure ROI? In that sense, agents are no different. Usually it comes down to time saving, but time saving is not the biggest reason why you would deploy agents. It's one of the benefits, but the real outcome is whatever problem that agent is solving. Is it resulting in better processes, better outcome, better resolution of tickets, or your business is winning more opportunities? Whatever that outcome is how we should measure. But I think it's a little too early to expect that level of forecasting.
I mean, it does come down to a little bit of like, use your brain. Like, what is it solving for? What's the broader impact? Because an agent for a customer help desk is going to be very different than an agent that does something else entirely that helps you assess your probability to win an opportunity. Like, then you might be looking at win rate, not just did I get there faster, for instance. So it's very much dependent on the job to be done. Okay, so we've spoken a lot about agents, where to get started, how to really get your organization comfortable with them. Let's also approach this from the perspective of what's available. There are a lot of platforms that now have out of the box agents. So they're kind of built in and can be surfaced or utilized in context. And there's a lot of platforms that have some sort of an agent builder. So you can imagine whatever you want and not be an engineer and build it yourself. I'd love to understand from your perspective, Sunder, how do organizations assess where they should be building on their own versus really leaning into what might already be available in the platforms that they have?
Yeah, I think that's a little tricky to figure out. But generally speaking, most agents, you still need to give it some level of specific instruction, some level of customization. And a same agent work operating for one organization may not fit exactly the same way for another organization. So there's some level of that learning that happens, instructions, that customization that happens. But if the problem is a common problem across multiple organizations, it's best to adopt one out of the box. The overhead in building and maintaining and monitoring and putting guardrails around it is all significantly lower than the ones you would build out of the box. But there are situations in which an building a custom agent might be the right choice if it's very specific to your organization. For instance, if you have your contracts process is that have a very specific workflow that goes through certain handoffs, you have clauses and conditions that are might be unique in some ways to your organization that an out of the box agent may not fit into the process. So there it makes sense to go build one. But again, it comes with all the overhead of not just building it, but to managing it. I'm kind of expecting maybe in a few months, that we are going to start to see job descriptions that say agent managers, that were managing agents become a full-time job. It might already be happening. I just haven't seen a job posting yet.
Okay, I know we did the predictions episode back a few months ago, but I think I'm gonna file that away as another prediction that you don't wanna be quoted on, but I might just remember it and come back to it. We'll be on the lookout to see if there are jobs out there for building agents. I think the distinction you're making is, look, if you've got a partner or platform that's worked with a lot of organizations that has built something that is a common kind of job to be done or specific task, like, do look at that first. But if your process has a lot of different criteria, or you're looking for something specific, It's something where you've got, bespoke criteria. Maybe then it's, build your own. That said, I don't know, is it fair to say, like, if you've got them built into the platform, like, try those before building your own?
Absolutely. Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, even before going to agents, maybe a AI assisted workflow would be sufficient. Models have come a long ways, even in the last 12 months. The model's ability to reason, to handle large contexts, have made some of the problems far more approachable without agents. Even a year ago, you would have needed somewhat more sophisticated solution. Now you can rely on the models a lot more.
Yeah, and I think it bears repeating. I heard this at a conference I was at recently, but it's sort of the way we've fixed processes or improved processes over time. Like, the first step is to actually understand the process that you've got, and should you change that process? Where are the friction points? Do you need to rework those steps? And what's best for that? And the answer to your point, like, it may not always even be AI. It may not always be agents. And that's where some of the hype plays in. I think people want to say, oh, yeah, I'm using agents, but was there actually a better, faster way to do it? Did you just not even have clear documentation of the way you were doing this thing today? The answer is not always AI. The answer is not always an agent. And those are the nuances to really think through before just diving in. So, we have spent a lot of our time today, rightfully, talking about when it is right to build agents, how to get started. But let's now shift to the perspective of an end user who's now maybe got a small army or even just one agent that they might be utilizing. Could be kinda scary. How do you make that less intimidating? Is it 100 courses? Probably not, but how do you essentially relieve the burden on the end user now that they have yet another thing they need to interface with in their day-to-day work?
I used to say AI has reached maturity when we stop talking about AI. I think in some ways the same could be said for agents. If it's a good solution, you shouldn't have to think about agents as an end user. You shouldn't even have to know what agents you're interacting with. You shouldn't have to know what the whole catalog of agents and figure out which one do I talk to? What do I ask? How do I talk to the agent? What should I say next? That should not be the end user's responsibility. They should be able to simply describe, this is what I'm trying to solve. This is my problem. This is the task I'm looking to complete. This is the outcome I'm looking for. And a good solution should take that burden off of the user and figure it out. And that's where these agentic framework is maturing. Things like orchestration, understanding user intent, and figuring out what has to execute. So the user is not having to tell the system. We want to remove as much of that complexity, bring as much abstraction as possible. So from the end user perspective, it almost feels like they're talking to a human, and they can pick and choose how they say what they want to say, when they say it, and the system should go with the flow. That would be a mark of a good solution as opposed to asking the user to carry all the weight.
Take the onus away from the user, make it work kind of in the context of their day-to-day work. And I mean, I think we've even talked about this internally. It's the difference between, oh, I need to know the name of all these agents to, hey, I could upload an RFP and get a question back that says, "Do you want me to run a win analysis on this or a fit analysis? Do you want me to actually write the first draft?" Because the broader system has that understanding of what that end user might want to do. And it becomes more about dialogue, choose your own adventure, and then there's learning built in. So maybe different options are surfaced the next time. Okay. So to bring this home, what is a piece of advice you want to leave the audience with? One thing that they can start doing with agents and one thing to avoid.
Yeah, I'd say don't wait for perfection. Everything I said up to this point may have sounded like, don't jump and immediately take baby steps. I may come across as a skeptic, and that's not my intent. But really waiting for that perfection, waiting for the technology to mature, waiting for all the questions to be answered might be too late because the market's headed there, the competition's headed there, everybody's using it. And if we don't start to learn, start to experiment, that do that early experimentation and start implementing that change process within the organization, we may fall behind. So that's one. What to avoid? The flip side of it, don't go head first too early, jump too far into the deep end, and go through the progression. Bring your teams along, bring your organizations along.
Well, if I were to put a wrapper around all of this, I think the whole reason we had this conversation is because there is urgency for teams to be adopting and embracing agents. It's not a one size fits all. So, yes, you've got to do it. I think the wisdom out there that if you're not failing or, learning and optimizing along the way, like you're not trying hard enough, I think that's true. At the same time, you've got to set things up so that you can have that learning and those wins. Yes, have a little bit of skepticism, but also don't sit on your hands. Find those use cases that are more repeatable. Even understand, is it right for an agent or something else? And then put those feedback loops in place, get the human in the loop, get that learning and understand where those opportunities are. And by the way, bring people along for the ride. And the good news is the technology is maturing such that it does become a better, more seamless experience for those actually using the agents that are built. I think there is rightfully a lot of promise, a lot of hope. There is still a place for skepticism. There is still place for change management. And thank you for sharing all of those insights with us today, Sunder. And for all of you out there, happy journeys ahead with your agent building and using experience. And do let us know what you're learning along the way.